Sure if it's live yet. There we go. Now I think we're live. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our TBI Talk Wednesday. This week we are here with Dr. Perry Maynard from Integrated Brain Centers, Denver, Colorado. And today we're talking all about balance after concussion or brain injury. And I think most people can relate that their balance has been impacted in some way, or maybe they're not aware that their balance has been impacted, but by doing a thorough exam, you find that it has been. Um, so let's just kind of dive into the topic. And I mean, when we think of balance, I think most of us understand balance is staying upright, maybe being able to stand on one foot. But how would you describe balance to a patient?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty quite simple. It's just your ability to stand upright in gravity, you know. If you like you kind of said with one foot, right? If you look at walking, and this is where we take for granted walking because it seems like it should be so simple, but really, right, it's these single leg balance tasks when you're moving, right? It's a very complex task, right? And balance itself
Yeah.
of standing upright seems quite simple, but there's a lot of moving parts to it. So when it does get broken or something does occur to it, right, a lot of things can go awry, right? And we know that so many different areas of the brain play a role in balance. And we also know that there's lots of different systems that have to communicate in order to keep us upright. So really, yeah, it's as simple as your ability to defeat gravity and stand upright.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the funny little saying I heard once, like walking is just one step away from falling.
Yeah, it's in essence control. Yeah, you could think of it as controlled falling.
Yeah, yeah, controlled falling. Yeah. And so you mentioned how all different parts of the brain help
Mhm,
us with our balance. Like it's not necessarily just one part, right? Like it's multiple parts working together. And
mhm,
I think that's where it gets to be tricky um when you visit, say a neurologist, like they're not necessarily their job is to diagnose things, not so
mhm,
much to help fix you afterwards. And where does everybody go? The neurologist, because what's in their
mhm,
name? Neuro.
mhm.
So you go to your neurologist and they're checking your balance and they tell you it's okay, like you're
Yeah,
fine, but yet you're not, like
yeah.
you're practically falling over every time you stand up. I know I used to have to put my hand on the wall to put my shoes on or I would
Mhm,
fall over. So maybe let's talk a little bit about both those different symptom or
mhm.
systems
Yeah.
that help us stay balanced.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because really when you look at balance, and we'll talk about it, there's so many different ways to test it, and people's brains are amazing in that they're very good at compensating. It's like if you only test an individual's balance in one sense, they could look really stable. I mean, people who have no inner ear, so like a bilateral vestibular loss, their balance on a hard surface can sometimes be rock solid, but they're still dizzy and they're still off balance when they're moving. So it's all about context. So if we're looking at balance, we can keep it simple in that there's really we have to think about the three organ systems or the three systems of the body or sensors that help us to understand where we are kind of upright, right? One is the inner ear, two is the eyes, and then three is the proprioceptive system. And more specifically, right, the feet and the legs and the trunk play a very large role in understanding where we are, right? So as I'm standing here and my center of mass, right? So we have kind of our center of mass, right, kind of in the middle, and we have to have that over kind of then we have our center of pressure, right, where that mass is being distributed, right? And so ultimately, what we have to do is we have to keep that center of mass over that center of pressure because as soon as that moves too far out, right, individuals fall. So, really, those three systems have to all work together to give you an idea of are you still, are you moving, What's the surface like? What's going on? So you could have an individual who maybe has a neuropathy and their feet are numb. And so their balance is off because the information coming from their feet is not good, right? And they have to now become reliant on their vision or their inner ear to keep them balanced. Or you may have someone with an inner ear infection and their balance is off because now their inner ear isn't giving them good information. So now they have to become reliant on their vision and their feet per se, right? And the way you can really tease this out is doing a little bit more of a dynamic balance assessment, right? So traditionally people might just stand there, eyes open, eyes closed. But what we like to do is a few different things is eyes open. So if we're thinking about an individual standing on a hard surface, eyes open, if you look at the research, you should be using a majority of input coming from your body and your feet to let you know where you are, right? A lot of people will be visually dominant in that situation when you use vision. So then what we do is we close vision and we say, how well can they maintain balance without one of their sensory systems? And if they're pretty rock solid, balance shouldn't change too much. If someone's very visually dominant, you may notice that they become very unstable, right? And it's a way of kind of sorting these things out. Next thing we do is we may put them on foam. So now what we do is we skew what their feet are saying. So now their brain, if healthy, should say, okay, my feet are moving all around. Let me listen less to my feet and turn up the dials on my inner ear and my vision, right? And then we close our eyes, which looks preferentially at how the inner ear is contributing to balance. And then what we do is we turn the head or we move the head around. So if we think about balance, balance should be referenced off where our body is, right? So if you think about it, if you're falling backwards, why does it matter where your head is? All you should really care about is where your trunk is, because that's how you're going to correct, right? Because if you're falling backwards, you're going to contract muscles in the front of your body to pull you forward. If you fall forward, you contract muscles in your backside to pull you backwards. So that really shouldn't change if your head's left, right, forward, or back, or
Mm.
whatever position. So now we're looking at how well can the cervical spine or the neck in the inner ear give you what's called a head versus body reference frame. And we know with concussions, this becomes an issue. So you may have someone who's stable, and then you turn their head to the right and then they fall. And you're saying, well, why didn't they know that they turned their head to the right? So balance testing, like I said, is you have to be dynamic with it. You have to take away and manipulate each of these different sensory systems to know which ones may be contributing to a balance issue. Because, like I said, it could be an inner ear, visual, or a proprioceptive issue. It could be all three. It could be two of them. But you need to tease that out and figure that out. And then lastly, another thing that you can look at too is looking at what's called tandem balance. So going back to balance, we have different balance strategies our body uses. So we can use what's called an ankle strategy, which this is where, say you lean backwards, and then you use your ankles to pull you forward. You can use a knee strategy where you may bend your knees to recover. And then there's what's called like a hip strategy, where all of a sudden this is where you see individuals
Is
shifting their
this,
hips around.
I just want to clarify, is this what you see patients doing like involuntary? Like this is
So
their reaction?
So it can be. So this is where with balance, where if you put someone's feet together, they may be rock solid, but what you have to do is you have to put them now in tandem. So now you have to put one foot in front of the other, because what that does is it gets rid of their ability to use their ankles and their feet, and you see how well, or are they using a hip or a knee strategy. So
Okay.
it's a way to also look at what is the strategy their brain is using to stabilize. Is it using the feet, the knees, or the trunk, or the hips? So they start shimmying. They may be rock solid, and then you put them in tandem, and all of a sudden their trunk starts to shimmy and they become ataxic all around. So you want to look at not only the systems, but also the strategies that they use, right? So this will start to give you an idea of how the brain, not only if those sensors are working, but how well is the brain interpreting those sensors? And then how well is the brain then controlling those things? And then last thing that you really want to look at is that, can individuals learn? So do patients get better the more you challenge their balance, or do they become more fatigable? And then the longer they stand on the foam, the worse they become. Or some individuals, their brain may adapt and they may learn. So you can see where it's not as simple as just stand and close your eyes. You really need to challenge the systems, and that can give you an idea of why someone says when I'm upright, I'm dizzy and I'm off balance. And when I'm sitting, I feel fine. It's only when I'm walking, right? It's only when I'm standing. And then they go to their neurologist and they stand, they put their eyes closed and feet together, and they're relatively okay. And they say, that looks fine. Like you said, walking is a controlled fall, right? It's a single leg stance, it's all these things. So um, I hope that kind of paints the picture of how complex balance is, and that if you're working with someone on balance and they're not looking at it from that in depth of a model, you could easily be missing a lot of the reasons why you may be off balance.
Hmm. Yeah, so I see there's quite a few people watching. So if anyone has questions, please go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'll try to sift through those as we're here live. Or just go ahead and drop a comment. Let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to know. All right, Perry. So we've kind of talked about now the testing that you go through, which is quite extensive. Because, like, when I went to the neurologist, I just stood with my feet together. I think I had my arms out and I closed my eyes. And I remember I was okay for a second. And then I was like, whoop. And, like, I opened my eyes and caught myself, and she was right there. But, when I had my functional neurology exam, it was like everything you just talked about, feet together, feet in front of each other on the foam, eyes open, eyes closed. Um, so really getting a much more in-depth picture at what's going on.
Mhm.
So now once you've done these testings, what are you looking for as far as what you're going to do with the patient? Like, how are you going to address what you find in your findings?
Yeah, definitely. So, like you said, what I'm kind of always looking for is, can I find maybe the either the sensory system that's not giving them good feedback, right? So let's say maybe let's just say hypothetically it's their feet and their feet are numb, right? Now we have to figure out, why are their feet numb? Are they diabetic? Do they have heart disease? Do they have small vessel disease? Right? And you may find that managing one's diabetes could magically make their balance far better, right? So we have to look at first and see, okay, is it the feet or the proprioceptive system that is not giving them good input? Is it the inner ear, or is it the vision? Or is it the part of the brain that regulates all of that? So like the cerebellum is a big part of your brain that regulates balance. So it receives all three of those sensory systems, and then it's what controls balance. So you can have individuals who could have cerebellar disease, stroke, or their TBI affected their cerebellum. And so there's nothing wrong with their inner ear per se, or their neck, or their eyes, but the part of the brain that is supposed to mash that all together and make it work doesn't work. Right? And these may be the individuals that are what's called ataxic. So they're kind of shaky when they walk, they go to move their hand, right? And so the way we may go about that may be totally different. So if it's an inner ear issue, then we want to do things. So the way I look at it is that if it's an issue with one of those sensory organs, so body, inner ear, or eyes, what we first need to do is examine that organ a little bit more and figure out where's the issue. And then we work on that, but then eventually we have to reintegrate it. So let's say the neck. Say someone had a whiplash injury and it's causing their balance to be off, which is something I see very, very commonly, that whiplash injuries create a ton of balance issues. So where we start is we start with doing things to work on remapping where the neck is, right? And getting the brain to just understand a little bit better where the neck is. But then we have to now start to get it to play nice with the inner ear and the vision. And once that's there, now we have to start playing with different contexts. So maybe we start seated and then we go standing. And then maybe with walking, where we start challenging the system. So where we started was just giving the brain better feedback of that sensory system, then getting it to integrate with other sensory systems, and then challenging it and putting it to the test, right? So that's kind of an example how we may approach if it's a single sensory system. And then if it's maybe the cerebellum that's playing a role, there's a lot sometimes we can do with giving visual feedback. So there's some cool balance machines we have where an individual can stand on a force plate and then they have a dot that shows them moving. And so what that does is that gives them visual information of how they move. So they can learn how to control that using their vision. So they may see that they're shaking all over the place, and now they can be aware of it, and now they can learn how to control that dot, and then how to start to be able to shift, right, and work on these postural systems. Because the problem in that case is that the part of the brain that's supposed to regulate all of those systems isn't working. So we have to, so that the key with that is that you have to produce error signals. So the brain really learns and adapts when it has error signals, and it says, okay, that wasn't correct, do it better the next time. And so that's a way where we can induce error signals, but in a balance specific way, so that they can learn to better control their balance, but using a visual feedback mechanism. And what's really interesting is that, the cerebellum can work well when you give it kind of visual feedback, and then it can start to learn. So there's a lot of things we can do with force plates and things like that to retrain your brain's ability to control posture. So there's a lot of really cool tools. And a majority of patients, we may use some of similar ones, but there may be differences or nuances depending on what's going on.
So we have a question from Michael, and it's a really good question. It's not specifically balanced, but it kind of ties in with what we're talking about. Um, and he said he hasn't been able to lie down on his right side for most of the last 7 years without his head spinning uncontrollably. Recently, he is now able to sleep on both left and right. But what happened? The inner ear has been ruled out. And I relate to this question because that was me. And
Yeah.
you cleared it up for me.
The first question, the first thing I would pose is, when you say your inner ear was ruled out, what does that mean? And what did they really test? Because unfortunately, seeing a lot of patients with inner ear conditions, a majority of them come to me and say, "No, I went to an ENT and everything was fine." And then I do my testing and I say, "No, it's
No,
not."
it's not.
So I would want to know what testing was actually done, because you want, if you're looking at laying down in the world spinning and things like that, most of the time that is something with how your brain is interpreting gravity. Um, so I'd be curious about the testing being done, because I'd say more often than not that is a inner ear issue, or it's an issue with the part of the brain in how it's interpreting what these systems are saying. So they might have done testing to just look at just your inner ear, but they didn't really analyze how your inner ear and maybe your eyes and your neck may be working together. So that would be my real first question, is exactly what testing was done. And maybe it was comprehensive and they're correct, but maybe they looked at a few different things and they didn't even look at, anything else. Um, so that's really what I would want to know before moving forward, is what all testing has really been done.
He did comment that BPPV was ruled out, and
Yeah,
that's exactly what I figured his answer
yeah.
was.
Which even going there, my even further question would be, is when they tested it, did they test you in the light, or did they test you with your vision occluded? So I've seen a lot of patients present to me where they said that's the case, but individuals were testing them in the light where they could stare off at the ceiling. Right? You don't really have issues unless you're laying down probably in the dark when
No,
there's no
that was
vision.
me.
So it's got to be more of a dynamic testing. And if they did test it with vision included and that got ruled out, then I'd say then that's appropriate. Then maybe that's not the case. And then in that case, it still could be central. And what I mean by that is that cerebellum we talked about, that controls and calibrates things, is not working appropriately. So think of it this way: as your inner ear is the TV, and your cerebellum is the TV repair shop. Maybe nothing is wrong per se with your inner ear, but the TV repair shop is not great. So that when your inner ear, or you bring your TV in to get a tune up, your TV repair shop's like, I have no clue what's going on, right? And it's not able to calibrate things appropriately. So my one question would be, did they do it in the light or the dark? So with occlusion, and if so, then that's where you could be looking at some of these more central issues where it's not an inner ear issue per se. It's the parts of the brain that are interpreting what your inner ear is saying. The reason I bring that up is I've had hundreds of patients who have presented just like that. They're like, this was ruled out. And then I look at them and I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about because it's right here. Or
So
it's,
unfortunate.
and then we do a few things and then magically it's way better. So I wish I could say I trust a lot of other doctors in the traditional sense in the especially in the inner ear world, but I haven't found that a lot of the testing is very comprehensive, um, and things like that. So that would be my thought, because if you're getting a perception of moving, that has to be either inner ear or the areas of your brain that interpret it. So it could be more brain related.
Yeah. Yeah. He's saying it was done in the light. And if he opens his eyes and focuses on something, it lessens until he closes his eyes again.
Yeah. So I guarantee you,
Exactly what I had.
I guarantee if someone tests you in the dark, they would find a different story, and you could make, and that there probably is something going on. So the fact that your rest of your brain is healthy enough that, because here's what's happening. When you're laying back, something's going on with the receptors, right? You should be able to detect that you are now horizontal in gravity, right? And that you're not moving, right? So you have different receptors in your inner ear that when you move, they pick up motion, right? But if you're static, you're not moving, and you're getting a perception of moving, either something's moving in that canal or your brain is misinterpreting that information. And so, like we talked about, you have redundancies in this system that if your brain's healthy enough, if you open your eyes, your brain can say that's a lie. So when you take away vision, it's like a game of telephone. And if you're in the dark laying down, you can't really rely on your body or your vision. So now you're relying on really bad input from the brain's inner ear system. So when you open up vision, it can say, "Ooh, ignore that. That was a total lie." So that's why how you test things and the way you test them in the context matters. If you get dizzy in the dark and no one's putting you in the dark, you may never really find the issue. Versus if you test in the light and you're okay in the light and you're okay upright, well, that's not the context that you're dizzy. So you have to make sure that someone's testing you in those different contexts, and that can give you a lot more feedback.
We have another question from Mike. It's a little off topic, but I'm curious to hear your answer. Not necessarily a question, more of a comment. When people hear of the probable diagnosis of CTE, they seem to focus on the rate of drug and alcohol abuse and how much more prone to addiction people are with suspected CTE. Um, Not really a question there, but what are your thoughts on people who have been given a probable CTE diagnosis?
The hard part is, you really can't, you're right, you really can't make the diagnosis
Yeah,
without an autopsy. So,
yeah,
and here's the thing too with CT, and there's some new research that came out, maybe it was like 2 years ago, that I remember that Dr. Carrick had presented on during one of his kind of one of the new TBI courses. It's kind of a renewal that happens every so often. And what was really interesting is that, and this doesn't go fully to the question is right. We always think of CTE from a standpoint of head injuries, but what's really fascinating is that you're seeing CTE in people who have no history of head injuries, right?
but have
So
history of
yeah,
drug
so
and alcohol abuse.
yeah, exactly. So I think it's more complex than head
Chicken
injuries
and
per.
egg.
Yeah, and it's, well, it's just, it comes back to that really CTE. I think what we're going to learn is a immune issue going on in the brain, and there's multiple ways to get there. A head injury is one of them. An infection, long haulers, COVID, you could argue, who knows, that
Yes.
could, you could argue that that could lead to a CTE presentation, right? Because all it is really deposits of proteins in the brain, similar to what you see with like Alzheimer's or some of these dementias, that kind of mess with the connections throughout the brain. Right? There's changes in the immune system within the brain. So uh, I don't know how much it does. One, you can't make an accurate diagnosis without an autopsy.
Yeah.
So I don't know how wise it is to give people that diagnosis when they're still living. I mean, because the question is too,
Is it a
You know,
helpful diagnosis?
is it a helpful versus let's focus on what can we control? And either way, the way I think about it is that we know that head injuries changes the way the brain fires, but it also changes the immune system in the brain, right? Which is part of the problem with CTE is there becomes a ton of inflammation within the brain and the immune system starts attacking the brain in essence. So what can we do to try to improve the immune system in the brain and some of those things? So it's a scary reality. I mean, it's scary for me. I played college football. I played football for 15 years of my life. I don't know. I mean, I know how I feel, and I know different things, right? So that's always lingering in my head. But like I said, we're learning so much every day, and head injuries alone are not the only way to get to CTE. And then the question is, how much do we focus on it? Because what can we do about it? We don't really know. So I like to look at things that we can control,
Yeah.
things we can quantify. And if we can improve things, and say a doctor says you have CTE because you have memory issues, and we do things to clean up your diet, maybe hyperbaric oxygen therapy, maybe neuro rehab, and you're like, oh my God, I feel amazing. Does that CTE diagnosis really matter anymore?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a hard thing to say.
And I've just seen so many people have huge turnarounds after seeking out functional neurology. And, it's just the way you guys look at it. It's such a more comprehensive exam. My initial exam was a couple hours long. The most
Mhm.
anyone had spent with me was 20 minutes prior to that. And just getting to that root problem of what's going on, whether it's balance, whether it's dizziness, um, whether it's memory loss.
Mhm.
A thing that's been coming up over and over in the group lately is people getting diagnosed with ADD or ADHD after brain injury. And it's like, well, if you didn't have that before, you don't have it now. Like it didn't just poof come out of somewhere. It's a problem with the brain. So I can't emphasize enough how much functional neurology has helped me and literally hundreds of people that I've met and seen at the clinics and in the group. It's coming up all the time. So, Dr. Perry, thank you so much for everything you do. Um, oh, we have one more question. I'm going to read this quick because it looks. What about testing for vertigo when you are experiencing it? Oh, hang on. There was a couple of things popping up about testing for vertigo when you are experiencing it at all times. Could it be something different than vertigo, as that seems to be the go-to diagnosis for anyone feeling dizziness? Are doctors not looking closely enough to find underlying issues of the brain?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the term vertigo is overused and used inappropriately, right? True vertigo by definition is spinning, right? The world spinning or you are spinning. And so what I always talk to patients about is how you describe it is important. So the things I look at is one, how do you describe it? So is it true spinning? And if it's true spinning, are you spinning or is the world spinning? Or is it more of like a floating, bobbing on a boat? Is it more of a disorientation? Do you not feel grounded? Right? Because people will describe it in all sorts of ways, and that can give you a window. And the other thing you want to look at from a standpoint is then, yeah, how long does it last, right? Is it constant? Does it last a few seconds, minutes, hours, days, right? And then what is it dynamic? So you'll find with most people, they may say it's really good lying, it's a little worse seated, and it's really bad standing. Or maybe they're like, it's fine when I'm standing, it's only when I lie down. So we have to find what are the different triggers because that can let us know. You're totally right. You could feel off standing because you have a neuropathy, right? So individuals could not feel their feet well, and they're just like, I feel off when I'm standing. You could have an individual who maybe has dysautonomia. And so they have difficulty regulating their blood pressure and their heart rate. So when they're standing, walking around, they just feel foggy, they feel lightheaded, they feel faint, what they may categorize as dizzy, but it's just because they can't get blood to the brain, right? Or maybe there's hormonal imbalances or blood sugar imbalances that are fatiguing their brain, making them perceive to be dizzy. So you're totally correct in that vertigo is an overused term. It's a very specific term, and that dizziness doesn't have to be the inner ear. It can be the inner ear. It can be vision. It can be the neck. It could be the feet. It could be blood sugar. It could be hormonal. It could be autonomic, so heart rate, blood pressure. So there can be a lot of different reasons, and you need someone who can thoroughly really assess all of those things. So inner ear, vision, neck, assess you metabolically. But those questions I pose are really important. Is it better lying, seated, standing? How long does it last? And then how do you describe it? And then what things make it better or worse? Because a lot of times, usually with dizziness, it's dynamic, and there's things that will make it better or worse, and that can tell you what systems may be affecting it.
Okay, I'm just so Natalie asked that question. Oh, Natalie, I think I responded to the wrong person. Carolyn, I posted a YouTube link that Perry did all about dizziness. I think I put that under Natalie's question by accident. So go check that out. That's a great video. He goes real in depth about dizziness.
Mhm.
Natalie asked, what about toe walking? I keep wanting to toe walk and can't figure out what it is causing this to keep happening. It seems like it gets triggered if I'm looking down, such as cooking. I don't have to have I don't seem to have a Babinski reflex. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So toe walking is an interesting thing that that I've seen some amount. I haven't seen a ton, but definitely seen patients with it. Seen kids with developmental delays with toe walking and things like that. And so I think there can be. So yeah. So one is always the question is there a true issue in the way your brain is controlling muscle tone and things like that, which can sometimes happen in strokes or developmental issues. What's interesting about the looking down is what
Mm-hmm.
it can sometimes be related to is, remember what we talked about with center of pressure. If we think about balance or perception, you have what's called a perceived center of pressure and then an actual center of pressure. So there's some discussion in theory in balance that if your brain perceives you're one place in the world, so say someone's got an inner ear issue and they think they're falling backwards, they will move their center of mass forward because they think they're backwards, right? So there could be something going on centrally in the way your brain is perceiving where you are in the world, and it's creating a abnormal postural response because of what it perceives to be occurring. So if this may be like an example would be as individuals, sometimes you see walking and they reach an arm out, right? They just randomly reach an arm out, right? That's a like a cantilever response or response to a perception of moving in a direction. So you're getting a reflex off of a perception that may or may not be occurring. So there could be something going on in once again some of those sensory systems that are integrating balance center of pressure, especially if it sounds dynamic. So if you're looking down or you're changing head position and it lessens and changes, to me that could be something a little bit more dynamic from an integration issue. And then my other thought would be of what was the mechanism of it coming on, right? Whether it be a head injury, a stroke, a hypoxic brain injury, born with it, because I think that could possibly change the some of the reasons why as well.
And then we have, are you doing okay on time, Perry?
Yeah, I got like I think like 5 or 6 minutes, and then I
Okay.
just gotta hop on another phone call.
All right, we have another great question. Again, we're a little off topic, but we're getting a ton of great questions. So this is
That's great.
awesome.
This is great. I'm loving the participation.
This is okay. Helen asked, is dysautonomia common with TBI? I struggle with vomiting and headaches and nausea sweats. I have I seem to have stimulus relates. I'm not sure what that sentence meant. I have an inner ear problem from the trauma as well as parietal lobe, and I test out with deficits in visual processing.
Yeah, I think dysautonomia is wildly common with concussions on some form or some level. Yeah, it's I think it's very much related. Sometimes it can be subtle, right? It can be something as subtle as abnormalities in their pupils or the way they sweat or their palms being cold. And it could be as extreme as they can't regulate blood pressure, heart rate, digestive function. I had a patient in recently where, or some patients with dysautonomia, they may use the restroom and they may faint, right? So it doesn't have to just be heart rate, blood pressure. It's anything that's autonomic, bowel function, sweating, temperature regulation. Another big thing with patients is they can't regulate temperature, hot, cold, and it's moving. It's like hot flashes on steroids, you know, and they just can't regulate temperature. So dysautonomia is very common with head injuries.
And Helen, I did post a link um, to a great video with Dr. Nate Kaiser. He's kind of the expert in
Oh,
the funk neural world with
oh.
dysautonomia. So be sure to watch that video. I think I've gotten to everybody's questions that were coming at me fast for a minute there. But I think I've gotten to all of them. Thank you all for such wonderful questions. Um, and oh, yep, then Helen said thank you. So thank you, Dr. Maynard, for being here today. This has been a great conversation, great interaction. Thank you, everybody, for all the wonderful questions. If you're catching the replay, go ahead and drop a question. We will try and get an answer for you. I'll try to monitor those comments, and we'll see you all again next month. Thanks, Perry.
Thank you so much, Amy.